Greetings all, Dr. Raphael X here with another video with my friend here, Jeremy. Click on the subscribe button, on the like button, share this video, leave a comment, all that good stuff. All right, so today we're going to talk about the philosophy of the body and how in contemporary times, really in contemporary philosophy, the body has been kind of absolutized. We have fallen into a monistic spirit. Before we can kind of say in Western philosophy, medieval times, modern philosophy, it's been really dualistic, and we see this clearly with Plato and Descartes too. Rene Descartes was very dualistic, and what's interesting is that, well, extremely dualistic, Descartes. What's interesting is that one extreme, because we're emotional creatures, we fall from one extreme to the other extreme, or we combat one extreme with the other extreme. So, what do we combat Descartes' dualism with? This contemporary monism, which sees the primacy of the body. We're going to talk about this in postmodernism with Foucault. We get into the Monti, the phenomenologist. Interestingly, a lot of these guys are from France, and yeah, talk about how really the body has been taken over. There is no use anymore in contemporary philosophy of talking of a binary in man, that man has a body and a soul, and the soul has the primacy, right? The soul is more important. This is in the past. Today, the body has become so important to the point of overtaking, usurping the soul's position, in the sense that all functions, or even the immaterial functions traditionally known, like thinking, things of that sort of man have just, they just, they point to the body. All that originates in the body, according to contemporary philosophy. So it has totally, the bodily has absorbed the spiritual, mental, as a extreme response to the mentalism of Descartes, right? So the problem with Descartes is that I think, therefore I am. He started with the mind, and the criticism is, well, if you start with the mind, you end in the mind, right? You can't, how do you justify the exterior? So to combat that, right, we absolutize the exterior and hence the body. Well, you want to chime in here, Jeremy? That would be good. You wouldn't mind?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. We got to figure out kind of what we're going to dial into, right? What we're going to focus on. Obviously, so many different points of entry. Some summary could be given. I think the defining characteristic of contemporary thought would be that split between the mind and the body, the idea that I'm in here, right? And here's my body, and the world is out there. How exactly we got to that view would be a question that historians of thought would be best fit to answer. Descartes would be one big name associated with that movement of thought. What you referred to, a reversion back to sort of a monistic view where it is only the body. That's also, I think, representative of many mentalities today, but I think it's more so verbal oftentimes, meaning a person, if pushed, will say, yeah, my philosophy, my ideology only permits the existence of the body, only of the brain. I'm nothing more than my body, but for all intents and purposes, I think most people do have that division, well, no pun intended, in mind. For example, if somebody loses a limb in a time of war, who would say that there's, say, whatever percent, 20%, 25% less of the person, right? If somebody loses both legs and both arms and even half their brain, still, we would say, no, that's fully a person. It's as much of a person as there was before. And even if I claim that I'm nothing more than my body, if I were to lose, say, half of my body and somebody were to say, you're 50% of a person, you have 50% of the rights that you had, you have 50% of the salary that you had, I would probably say, no, I'm not going to go with that. And then it would follow that I must be something more than strictly my body. Perhaps I'm an epiphenomenon of my body. I'm a resultant of bodily processes, but I'm not just my body, I would likely then say. Right? And yet this view that a person can be split up into their mind and their body carries with it many problems of its own. For example, there's innumerable issues with the classical contemporary views of perception. There's an object, there's a thing in itself. There's so-called photons that bounce off of the object, and then they enter into the eye and go down the optical nerve, and then they're into the brain, and they form the image. So many problems with such accounts that if we also simply go with the basic dichotomy as suggested by Descartes of body here, mind somewhere here, whatever it might be, there's also very many issues of that. So we can also discuss some interpretations of philosophy that perhaps reconcile those contradictions that would then ensue, and whatever else comes up.
Yeah, no, that's definitely yeah, some good points for sure. It's you know, because Descartes' position, right, he started off with the mind, kind of to counteract that. The materialist, we could say that's with postmodernism or contemporary philosophy. There's even postmodernism. Let's just say contemporary philosophy, which is a bunch of philosophies put together. It's a really kind of like it's a syncretism for sure, but it's a materialist, relativist syncretism where there's just a whole complicated soup of different ideologies, but it's really saying a lot of what the hedonist said in the past, what the materialist said in the past, right? With the empiricist, right? Empiricism being the epistemology of materialism, which is the metaphysics of the past. But it's these arguments which you're providing for very legit. Like we can prove the existence for the soul using logic, as we did in videos in past videos. But contemporary philosophers don't. It's a total different mentality. I've talked to postmodernists, and they even think logic is like some sort of power struggle. Right? Logic itself is not something which me myself using would convince someone, right? Would demonstrate. They don't believe in demonstration. So it's the radical postmodernists. So they don't think in categories of like metaphysics and things like that. So they think of categories of power. And so Foucault is really interesting in this part, and he's following Michel Foucault, he's following kind of Nietzsche, and they absolutize the body as the body being the subject and the object, really. So everything, especially consumerism, for example, is really the focus is the body, right? Everything is about how the body relates to society, right? How the body has been treated throughout history. So they rebel against the puritanical view, they call it, right, the puritanical view of kind of suppression of the bodily desires, and they defend, right? They propagate the belief, right, for the kind of a total freeing of the bodily desires. So not only the body, the individual, we can say the body doesn't serve the individual as it is traditionally, right, has traditionally been taught, that the body serves the individual. The body is an instrument. No, the body becomes an end in itself. The individual serves the body, right? So what you're called to do is you're called to, right? You're here to, like, this is your whole purpose, and this is again hedonism run amok, hedonism justified in a very complex way. You're here for basically fulfilling your body's desires, and we see this very radically in Michel Foucault, who was basically a perverted philosopher, a homosexual, justified pedophilia, basically any type of disordered desire that comes from the body. Or traditionally, especially we see this with the Stoics, right, Aristotle, and many classical philosophers, that virtue was the means of obtaining or fulfilling your purpose, right? Virtue comes, we naturally we're naturally reasonable creatures, and rational activity is manifested in virtue. But the hedonists would go against that, and it seems like these contemporary, and nothing's really new under the sun. This is what's interesting. These contemporary philosophers are really resurrecting that concept and making it really complex. It's hard to understand the contemporary philosophers. They are super complex. So, um, so basically, it comes down to bodily desires. And what is the strongest bodily desire? The strongest one, without a doubt, is the sexual urge, right? So it comes to the point where the sexual urge, right, becomes the ultimate fulfillment of man. And we see this very much kind of, underlined in Foucault. Spelled Foucault, by the way, but Foucault, we'll say it in the French way, of course. And yeah, I don't know if you want to chime in here. I know I dealt with a lot of things, but
Yeah. Well, we could perhaps, for clarity's sake, juxtapose two extremes here. One would be extreme asceticism, and one would be extreme hedonism. And so, extreme asceticism has a very interesting history. So some of the things that are recorded as having been done by people that went to war with their body, be it in the Orient or in the Western tradition, our jaws will drop. Right? Whether it's picking up maggots from rotting flesh, putting them back in, and saying, "Eat what you have been given." Whether it's standing on top of a pole or living on top of a pole, chained for possibly decades, if I'm not mistaken, living in a hole somewhere, wearing cloth shirts, meaning that are really itchy, sleeping on nails, all kinds of things. Right? This has been well documented. To the question, whipping, obviously, self-lacerating, all of that. So first, let's ask ourselves what possibly could be the thinking, and not to say the justification, but the thinking of people that have done this. Be easy to dismiss all of them as complete loons, but not all of them were complete loons. Certainly, some high saintly people and super people were associated with this movement of extreme asceticism. It would seem that an individual past a certain point of development is able to think of themselves as something other than their body, and as a principle or a personhood such the values of which are at odds with the impetuses of the body. Right? I want to get closer and closer to truth and reality, best as I understand it. I want to purify my mind, sanctify my heart, and yet my body the whole time simply wants to continue being an animal. Right? It has its hungers and its thirsts and its lust and all of that. And no matter what heights I climb in my own inner development, my body remains grounded, or at least that I think would be along the lines of the reasoning of the extreme ascetics, and consequently, they wish to break their body, break their animal desires. And yet the pitfalls of that need not be stated. I am kind of a extreme psychological distress, obviously ill health, unbelievable sufferings, and ultimately to what end? Because the body will not yield. Whatever I do, I want to continue to breathe, and I want to continue to eat, or I need to continue to eat. All of those desires and drives will remain put regardless of what I do. Now we swing to the other end, which could be called something like what you mentioned, extreme hedonism, or mindless indulgence of the bodily impulses. Here, I don't eat to live, I live to eat. Mm-hmm. I live to enjoy the possibilities of enjoyment such that my body presents to me. The body or desire would be a state that accompanies the satisfaction of an objective. For example, I have an itch and I scratch it. So I have a little bit of desire. I want to have money, and I win the lottery. Oh, lots of, or did I say desire? I meant pleasure. Pleasure is, I didn't say that. Pleasure is the state that accompanies the satisfaction of desire. So lots of pleasure. Should I win the lottery? So the body presents a host of objectives, the satisfaction of which yields various degrees of pleasure. And it would seem that the more important the objective, the more pleasure. I'm starving and I eat. Oh, feels really good. I'm really thirsty and I drink, feels really good. I'm not so thirsty, I'm not so hungry, and the meal also may not feel so great, and the beverage may not feel so good. So by asking myself, what desires, what objective does my body have? What desires does my body present to me? And then using my intellect to satisfy them, I can become, in effect, the slave of my body. And from morning to night, the extreme here, just because we are considering the extreme would be simply, again, from moment to moment, trying to stimulate myself best I can. Maybe I wake up immediately. How can I attain the pleasure? And then the next step, the extreme of this extreme would probably be drug use, right? It would be addictions here, literally, right? I get a high, it wears off. I feel horrible. Then I need another high, and then I need another high. Maybe gambling, right? I feel good for a second. Am I going to win? No. Again, I try. Again, I try. Right. So many of us, unfortunately, have fallen into the pits of such servitude and slavery to the corporal, and that's no go. Right? Should somebody say why? Well, why is it a problem? Well, for one thing, it's impossible because if we the satisfaction comes after a negation. I get thirsty and then I drink. If I just keep drinking, the pleasure will be lost. If I just keep eating, there cannot be pleasure. If I just keep satisfying myself in certain other corporal ways, there cannot be satisfaction. There has to be first a negation. There has to be rest. So it's impossible as it is, and it destroys us if we try. So one extreme does not work. Asceticism, extreme asceticism. I'm going to torture myself. I'm going to impoverish my body and starve myself. And the other extreme does not work. I'm a slave of my body. What's the median here, or the medium? It would seem to be to take the desires or the needs of the body, take them for what they're worth, satisfy them in a reasonable way, and always be aiming for something higher, for the higher human life. Make the lower subservient to the higher. I can eat, and with that energy, I can go do charity. I can do something good. I can drink, and then I can go also do something good, or work out and exercise and make that subservient to something even higher, and so forth and so on. I can try to regulate my other corporal impulses and confine them to something that, again, my reason tells me is appropriate, such as marriage. And consequently, I can focus on being a human being and not a human animal without that extreme of trying to annihilate or beat my body at a game that my body certainly will win. Right? Breathe, eat, drink, enjoy. Just do it in moderation and make it subservient to higher values and higher purposes. It could be here a happy median to strike.